Former President Trump reacting with a string of insults to the new charges added against him in the Mar-a-Lago secret documents case, decrying what he calls the horrible people he thinks are behind it. The special counsel, in a sense, doubled down on its document investigation, now accusing Mr. Trump of being part of a scheme to delete security camera footage.
Okay, so Trump just got hit with something that has his legal team absolutely freaking out right now. And what the special counsel just added to the indictment could be the smoking gun that finally brings him down. We're not talking about theoretical obstruction. We're not talking about maybe he knew or maybe he didn't. We're talking about documented proof that Trump personally directed efforts to destroy evidence that federal investigators had already requested. And the evidence they tried to destroy? Security camera footage showing exactly what happened with those classified documents. But before we break down how catastrophic this is for Trump, real quick, you can't trust mainstream media to explain what's really at stake here. They'll give you the sanitized version to bring you the real story with no corporate filter. If you want to understand what's actually happening in Trump's legal nightmare instead of just getting talking points, hit that subscribe button right now, because what's unfolding with these new charges could literally put Trump in federal prison. Your subscription matters. Let's go. All right, so here's what actually went down, and this is absolutely wild. The special counsel just filed what's called a superseding indictment. That's legal speak for we're adding more charges because we found even more crimes. And these aren't minor additions. These are obstruction charges that demonstrate Trump didn't just take classified documents and refuse to give them back. He actively orchestrated a cover-up to hide evidence from federal investigators. Think about what that means. This isn't a misunderstanding. This isn't poor record keeping. This is deliberate destruction of evidence. This is knowing the feds are coming and trying to erase proof of what you did. That's textbook obstruction of justice, and it's exactly what gets people sent to prison. So let's break down the timeline here, because the details are absolutely damning. After the FBI initially requested the return of classified documents, Trump's lawyers told the Justice Department that they'd searched Mar-a-Lago thoroughly and returned everything. They signed certifications saying all classified material had been handed over. But the FBI had reasons to believe that wasn't true. They had intelligence suggesting documents were still at Mar-a-Lago. That's why they eventually executed the search warrant. Now here's where it gets interesting. The FBI specifically requested security camera footage from Mar-a-Lago. They wanted to see who had access to the storage room where documents were kept. They wanted to see if anyone was moving boxes around. They wanted a complete picture of what happened with these classified materials. And Trump's team initially said they'd cooperate with that request. That's alleged criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. Share this video with everyone you know, because the specifics of how this allegedly went down are absolutely wild. According to the superseding indictment, Trump's co-defendant Carlos de Oliveira, who's a property manager at Mar-a-Lago, had conversations with the IT director about deleting server footage. And these conversations happened right after Trump was informed that the FBI wanted to see the security camera recordings. The indictment describes de Oliveira going down to the IT equipment room and asking the IT director how long the server retained footage, then allegedly asking what it would take to delete that footage. The IT director apparently got uncomfortable with these requests and told de Oliveira he wouldn't know how to do that even if he wanted to. But the fact that the request was made, the fact that there were multiple conversations about deleting this footage, that's what prosecutors are now charging as part of the obstruction conspiracy. Think about the implications here. If Trump ordered security footage deleted, that means he knew that footage would be damaging to him. He knew it would show something prosecutors could use against him. You don't destroy evidence unless that evidence hurts you. Innocent people don't delete security camera recordings when investigators ask for them. Innocent people hand over the footage and say, "See, nothing to hide." But Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to prosecutors, he saw federal investigators closing in, knew they were going to request security footage, and tried to make that footage disappear before they could see it. That shows consciousness of guilt. That shows Trump knew he'd done something wrong and was trying to cover it up. Now, Trump's response to these new charges has been exactly what you'd expect. He's on Truth Social ranting about witch hunts and hoaxes. He's calling the special counsel horrible people. He's claiming this is all political persecution designed to interfere with his 2024 campaign. He's saying the charges are fake and made up and that he did nothing wrong. But here's the problem for Trump. The special counsel wouldn't add these obstruction charges unless they had evidence to back them up. Federal prosecutors don't just accuse people of destroying evidence without proof. They have witnesses. They have testimony from the IT director about the conversations that happened. They probably have text messages or communications showing Trump's involvement. They have a timeline that shows these deletion requests happened right after Trump learned about the FBI's interest in the footage. Adding obstruction charges fundamentally changes the nature of this case. It's one thing to argue Trump didn't understand classification rules or thought he'd declassified everything or believed he had the right to keep the documents. Those are legal defenses his lawyers could try to make work. But it's completely different when you're charged with destroying evidence. There's no innocent explanation for that. You can't claim you didn't know deleting security footage was wrong when federal investigators specifically requested it. You can't argue you were protecting executive privilege by erasing recordings of your own property. There's just no good legal defense for deliberately destroying evidence that prosecutors have asked for. And the timing of these charges is absolutely brutal for Trump. This superseding indictment dropped right as Trump's legal team was preparing their defense strategy for the documents case. They were getting ready for trial, figuring out their arguments, planning their witness list. And now prosecutors just added a whole new dimension that they have to deal with. Think about how this plays out at trial. Prosecutors can now tell the jury, look, this isn't just about Trump taking documents he shouldn't have. This is about Trump knowing he broke the law and trying to cover it up. He didn't just refuse to return classified materials. He tried to destroy evidence of what he did. That's not the behavior of someone who thinks they're innocent. That narrative is devastating because juries understand obstruction. Even if they get confused about classification rules or Presidential Records Act or executive privilege debates, everyone understands that destroying evidence is what guilty people do. Everyone knows you don't delete security footage when investigators ask for it unless you're trying to hide something. Now let's talk about the specific charges Trump is facing here, because they're serious. Obstruction of justice is a felony. Each count can carry significant prison time. And when you combine these new obstruction charges with the original charges about willful retention of national defense information and conspiracy to obstruct, Trump is now looking at potential decades in federal prison if convicted on everything. His lawyers will obviously argue he's not guilty. They'll claim he didn't personally direct anyone to delete footage. They'll say any conversations about the server were innocent inquiries that got misconstrued. They'll argue prosecutors are reading malicious intent into ordinary business operations at Mar-a-Lago. But the fact that prosecutors felt confident enough to add these charges suggests they have evidence that contradicts those potential defenses. Share this with everyone, because here's what's really important to understand. The special counsel didn't have to add these charges. Jack Smith could have proceeded with just the original document charges and had a strong case. But by adding obstruction, he's demonstrating to Trump and to Trump's legal team that they have evidence of even more criminal conduct. This is prosecutors saying, we know what you did, we have the proof, and we're charging you with all of it. That sends a message. It tells Trump's lawyers that prosecutors aren't bluffing, that they have witnesses who will testify about the deletion scheme, that they have communications or recordings or documentary evidence showing Trump's involvement. And it tells Trump himself that the government has penetrated his inner circle and knows about conversations he probably thought were private. Think about what that means for potential cooperation. If De Oliveira or the IT director or other Mar-a-Lago employees are cooperating with prosecutors, that's catastrophic for Trump, because they can testify about what Trump told them directly. They can describe conversations where Trump talked about making the footage disappear. They can provide first-hand accounts of Trump directing the obstruction. And if those witnesses are credible, if they have corroborating evidence like text messages or recordings or contemporaneous notes, then Trump's denials don't matter. It becomes his word against multiple witnesses who have no reason to lie and every reason to tell the truth to avoid their own prison time. Now, Trump's defenders are already spinning this as overreach. They're arguing that Trump had every right to manage his own property's security systems, that he could delete footage for any reason or no reason, that having conversations about IT infrastructure isn't a crime. And technically, they're right that property owners generally can do what they want with their own security systems. But that's not what's happening here. The issue isn't Trump deleting footage in the normal course of business. The issue is Trump allegedly ordering deletion specifically because federal investigators had requested that footage. That's not property management. That's evidence tampering. The criminal act isn't the deletion itself. It's the deletion for the purpose of obstructing a federal investigation. Think about the analogy. If police execute a search warrant at someone's house and that person starts destroying evidence while police are walking up the driveway, that's obstruction. The person might own the house and ordinarily have the right to destroy their own property, but once law enforcement has issued demands for evidence, destroying that evidence becomes a crime. Same principle applies here. Make sure you're subscribed because the legal precedents on this are actually pretty clear. There are tons of obstruction cases where defendants got convicted for destroying evidence after investigators requested it. This isn't novel legal theory. This is standard obstruction of justice prosecution. The only thing unusual about this case is that the defendant is a former president. But Trump being a former president doesn't give him special permission to obstruct federal investigations. In fact, you could argue it makes it worse. Trump was the chief executive. He was in charge of enforcing federal laws. He knows how investigations work. He knows what obstruction is. He can't claim ignorance of the law when he literally used to oversee the Justice Department. And that's going to be prosecutors' argument at trial. Trump isn't some ordinary citizen who made a mistake. He's a former president who deliberately interfered with a federal investigation into his own conduct. He used his knowledge of law enforcement and his position of power to try covering up his crimes. That's aggravating, not mitigating. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this case is moving toward trial, and these new charges completely change the landscape. Trump's legal team will file motions trying to get the obstruction charges dismissed. They'll argue prosecutors don't have enough evidence or that Trump's conduct doesn't meet the legal definition of obstruction. Judges will have to rule on those motions. If the obstruction charges survive those challenges, which they probably will given that prosecutors had to present this evidence to a grand jury that voted to indict, then we're heading toward a trial where these allegations will be front and center. The jury will hear testimony from the IT director about the deletion requests. They'll see communications about the security footage. They'll hear from other Mar-a-Lago employees about what Trump told them. And Trump's lawyers will have to explain to the jury why their client was having conversations about deleting security footage right after learning that federal prosecutors wanted to see it. That's going to be very difficult to explain in a way that doesn't sound like consciousness of guilt. Think about the jury instructions on this. The judge will tell jurors that they can consider whether Trump's behavior after the crime is evidence that he knew he'd done something wrong. Destroying evidence is exactly the kind of behavior that suggests guilt. It's something judges specifically tell juries to consider when evaluating whether someone committed the underlying crime. So even beyond the obstruction charges themselves, this evidence helps prosecutors prove the original document charges, because it shows Trump knew the documents were problematic, knew he shouldn't have them, and knew returning them would expose him to legal jeopardy. That undercuts all of Trump's potential defenses about innocently believing he'd declassified everything or not understanding the rules. Share this video because Trump's political calculation here is really interesting. He's trying to use these criminal charges as proof that the system is corrupt and out to get him. He's fundraising off the indictments. He's telling supporters that Democrats weaponize Justice Department to take down their movement's leader. And that strategy has worked politically in the sense that his poll numbers among Republicans have stayed strong. But here's the problem. That strategy only works until you're actually convicted. Right now, Trump can claim witch hunt because he hasn't been found guilty yet. But if a jury convicts him on these obstruction charges, if 12 ordinary citizens look at the evidence and conclude Trump deliberately destroyed evidence, that witch hunt narrative becomes much harder to maintain because prosecutors can say this wasn't political persecution. This was a jury of Trump's peers evaluating evidence and determining he committed crimes. That's not weaponization of justice. That's justice system functioning exactly as designed. A grand jury indicted him, a trial jury convicted him. That's how the process is supposed to work. And if Trump goes to prison, if he's actually sentenced to serve time in a federal facility, his claim that this is all fake becomes completely untenable. You don't send people to prison based on made-up charges. You send them to prison because they committed serious crimes, and a jury determined that beyond a reasonable doubt. Now Trump's hope is that he wins the 2024 election before any of this goes to trial. If he becomes president again, he can direct his attorney general to drop the federal charges. He can pardon himself or argue a sitting president can't be prosecuted. He can use executive power to make his legal problems disappear. That's his endgame strategy. But these new obstruction charges make that timeline tighter because prosecutors are pushing for a speedy trial. They want to get this case in front of a jury before the 2024 election. They want a verdict while Trump is still just a candidate, not while he's president again. And if they succeed in getting trial scheduled for early 2024, Trump could be convicted before voters cast their ballots. Think about what that means for the election. Trump as the Republican nominee, possibly convicted on federal charges of obstructing justice and mishandling classified documents, may be facing sentencing before voters decide whether to put him back in the White House. That's an unprecedented political scenario. We've never had a major party nominee running for president after being convicted of federal crimes. Would voters care? Trump's base probably wouldn't. They'd see conviction as proof the system is corrupt and rally even harder to his side. But swing voters, independents, moderate Republicans, that's where conviction potentially matters. Because it's one thing to dismiss charges as political. It's much harder to dismiss an actual guilty verdict from a jury that heard all the evidence. Make sure you're subscribed because over the next few months, we're going to see this case move through pretrial motions, discovery fights, jury selection, and eventually trial if Trump doesn't cop a plea deal, which he almost certainly won't. Every step of the way, there will be drama. Every ruling will be analyzed. Every witness will be scrutinized. And through it all, Trump will be ranting on social media about how unfair everything is. His lawyers will be filing motion after motion trying to delay or dismiss. His supporters will be claiming deep state conspiracy. But ultimately, a jury is going to decide whether Trump obstructed justice by trying to delete security footage. And if they convict him, no amount of political spin changes that reality. So here's where we are. Trump just got hit with new obstruction charges for allegedly directing the deletion of security camera footage that federal investigators had requested. These charges show prosecutors have evidence of Trump personally orchestrating a cover-up. His legal team is in crisis mode because there's no good defense for destroying evidence. And we're heading toward a trial that could result in Trump being convicted and sentenced to federal prison before the 2024 election. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is actual federal charges filed by a grand jury that reviewed evidence and determined there's probable cause to believe Trump committed these crimes. The legal system is closing in on him, and unlike his previous investigations that ended without charges or resulted in impeachments that went nowhere, this time Trump is actually going to trial. But the fact that we're even at this point, the fact that a former president is charged with obstructing justice by destroying evidence, that's already historic. And what happens next will determine whether Trump finishes his life as a convicted felon in prison or manages to escape accountability one more time. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. The Mar-a-Lago documents case is the most serious legal threat Trump has ever faced.